everyone, let's get started. In this episode, we're going to be looking at closing out the dialog box. So that way, if we want to just stop showing any of the text and maybe just show the scene for a bit, maybe for like transitions, maybe we stop showing the box as we switch to a new scene, we want to have the option to close that and to open it. So that's what we're going to do today. Inside of our dialog system, we have the dialog container. So if we open that up real quick, let's go ahead and add two functions. The first one is going to be show, and the second one is going to be hide. These functions will be able to be called from the dialog system and from our dialog files, so that way we can go ahead and show it or hide it when we need to. But in order to do that, we need a canvas group to maintain the opacity of this whole dialog container. We should already have one attached to the root container object, which if we just lower that, we can see that we can fade in that box. This would be attached to the root game object, so let's make a shortcut to grab the canvas group off of that root. This is just going to be a getter that gets the component canvas group from off of the root. And for show and hide to work, they're both going to access the same coroutine that's going to raise up or lower the opacity. This is going to be a coroutine called fading, which takes in the target alpha. And if we're going to be running this coroutine, switching between show and hide, we need to keep track of if it's running, which means we need the typical references up above. We can keep track of both of these using CO showing and CO hiding as different coroutines to cache the value, and then some simple booleans to show us whether each one is true or not, depending on if those coroutines are not null. And then another one to tell us if it's fading at all, which will be true either if it's showing or if it's hiding. So what's going to be running these coroutines will be the dialog system. We always try to relate the coroutines to whatever manager handles these operations and what is closest to what these things are related to. In this case, for the dialog container, that would be the dialog system. So let's quickly check. If is showing, then we aren't going to do anything because we're already showing. Now, else, if is hiding, then we want to make sure that we stop that coroutine. So if we're hiding when we're trying to show, let's make sure that we stop the coroutine for hiding on the dialog system, and then set that coroutine to null. And then we are free to start. So we can say co showing equals the dialog system .instance .start coroutine, and we're going to start fading, moving to the alpha of 1, so we become fully opaque. And let's just copy that from show, paste it into hide, and say if is hiding, then we return. Otherwise, if we are showing, then we want to make sure that we stop the showing coroutine and set that to null. And then we'll start the hiding coroutine, which will be fading to the alpha of 0. Now, as for what this function does, all we're going to do is grab the canvas group and then change the alpha. Let's go ahead and cache the canvas group so that we don't have to get the component every frame. Then we loop until the canvas group's alpha is equal to the alpha that we have assigned here, moving that alpha gradually towards the target by a default fade speed, which we define above in a constant as 1. Once that happens, we go ahead and set this showing and hiding coroutines to null, so it finishes. And so if I add an update function to a testing script and just hide it if I press the down arrow and show it if I press the up arrow, then what we get is exactly what we would expect. It will fade out and it'll fade in on demand. Might be a little slow, so we can change the value. I may change the default speed to 2 then. And 2 was still a little slow, so I decided to change it to 3 instead. Which means now we can come into our command database extensions and look at our database extension for the general commands. This already has a command in here, wait, which waits before moving on to the next command, but let's go ahead and add one to show and hide the dialog. And we're just going to add two commands called showDB for show dialog box and hideDB for hide dialog box. Both of those commands are only going to yield and return for the duration of the show and hide commands on that dialog container. But I did not make those return a coroutine, so let's jump back real quick. Let's go back to show and make sure that at the very end, first of all, we make this a coroutine return type. And if we are showing, we return null. If we're hiding in this case, we return null there. Actually, no, we return CO hiding here, because that's already running. We return CO showing here, because that's already running there. But at the end, we'll just go ahead and return whatever coroutine that we started. And like that, we have those commands available to us in the dialog system. So with that in place, in my test dialog file, I have Stella and Raylene in the storm, and then they see a lodge. At which point, once they see the lodge, they're going to run to it, and then we transition out the background, and we stop the music, we wait a second, and then we transition into a new background, which is inside of the inn, and we start playing a new song. At which point, then they come on screen, we wait another second, and they start speaking. So after they decide they're going to go into the lodge, I'm going to say hide db to hide the dialog box, and then once they start talking, I'm going to say show db, and we're going to show the dialog box again. So here we are, we see something over there, Raylene says it's a lodge, and they go. We fade out, we fade back in, and now comes back the dialog box. Now maybe instead of having to show the dialog box, I could make this automatic whenever a character starts speaking. So when we can avoid using show db again maybe, and once another character starts talking, it will automatically show the dialog box if it's hidden. This involves being able to check if the dialog box is visible. So we can add ourselves a new boolean, public bool is visible, and set that to true if CO showing is not equal to null, or our root cg.alpha is greater than 0. And since the conversation manager handles the dialogue running from the files, let's go into the section where we run the dialogue, and we can see we assign the speaker and we build the segments. So let's also make sure that if the dialog box is not visible, that it becomes visible. And we can do that simply by checking if is visible is false, and if it is false, we go ahead and show the container right before we get started building the dialog segments. And without having to show the dialog box with the command, it will automatically come up when the next bit of dialogue starts. So that's how we show the dialog box. In the next part, we're going to actually handle showing and hiding the complete dialog system. That includes the backgrounds and everything attached to this UI. We can fade in and out the whole system, and we'll take care of that in the next video.